Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Third Eye's Artist Roundtable on COVID's impact on community art and performance, the last in a series that you have been witnessing over the last 6 months. I'm Anuj Vaidya. I'm a board member of Third Eye, and it is such a pleasure to have Natalia Ivanova Mount, who is ED of Pro Arts Gallery and Commons, artist and writer, and Praba Pilar, who is a diasporic Colombian artist who works on media, technology, and its implications for our lives, our worlds, and our futures. Praba and Natalia are dear, dear friends, on top of being collaborators. And it is such a pleasure to be in conversation today about collective visions towards a sustainable and collective future that centers process, collaboration, and imagination, and hope, or wonder, not hope, but wonder for the future. Welcome to the conversation. What we're going to do today is first just have a conversation about pro arts and the history of pro arts, because it's been an institution in our community for a long time, since the 70s, right, Natalia?
That's correct.
Maybe you can tell us a little about the history of pro arts.
That's right. Pro Arts is one of the oldest art institutions, or should I say independent art institution. There's a difference there. Part of the alternative art movements of the 70s. And it began in 1974, originally as an offshoot, as a neighborhood network for the arts, and an offshoot of a federal program called CITA, which basically Pro Arts was an umbrella for other ethnic organizations and other artists and other smaller collectives and formations to support the the structures of those organizations, as well as to develop educational programs, both for artistic labor and artists. And so in the 80s, Pro Arts became Pro Arts, changed their name to Pro Arts, and basically focused very fully on the production and presentation of visual art exhibitions and interdisciplinary programs at then a space in Jack London Square. And for the past, I would say 14 to 15 years, we have been at Frank Ogawa Plaza, which is in now Oscar Grant Plaza in downtown Oakland. And so this very Pro Arts has been embedded in the community since 1974, also because it started as an artist and actually a neighborhood network that very much resembles to what we've been trying to do, all of us actually together in Oakland, to create a different kind of institution that is more like the commons. It has the, or it's a node in a more liberatory system that has decentralized resources, both intellectual and physical assets, and it's consistently focused on the support and the service to the field, the expanded field of art, and to, in a way, continue to create the spaces and the sites and the means for production in the arts, very much locally, regionally, here in the Bay Area. But for the past several years, since I've actually became the director of Pro Arts in 2015, we have been scaling up and expanding to reach international and more global network and comrades, so we can continue creating again those sites and new spaces and new formations for the production and presentation and distribution of art.
That's really what we need really right now, right? Like thinking about alternatives to the market and a way to actually give voice to the community. And so as an artist who has been working with Pro Arts, I really, really appreciate the space that Pro Arts has created. And Praba is also an artist who works with Pro Arts in more than just one way. more than exhibiting, is part of the visionary um, nucleus of the space. But the space has actually faced a lot of challenges during COVID. Um, can you speak about some of those challenges, Natalia? Especially because the downtown area actually just changed drastically, right, during COVID. And the
That's right.
audiences that you might have had otherwise kind of dissipated and disappeared.
Yeah, we. It's interesting because we began at Proarts in 2018. I wrote an essay, or sort of like a pamphlet called "Reframing Art and Art Labor in the Context of a Sharing Economy." And since 2019, we actually began here in Oakland, downtown at Proarts, to organize under the formation of the commons. So in a way, we began experiencing the pains and I suppose um, the main problem is funding and support for the experimental art, or for those spaces that allow for experimentation and might not be connected to the market or the traditional market system. And so even before COVID, we were struggling to maintain funding and sort of like, I suppose, by, recognition in a way as a model, because again, the funding that we would receive was very specifically supporting specific programs or artists. However, we never really were able to build a sustainable operational and structure that can actually support the art labor, which is behind all the production and all the support for the individual projects or artists. So the system also was already, we began thinking that the system was already broken. Our connections to each other were already broken. The connections between artists, institutions, and the community were already broken. And so in 2019, we became Pro Art Gallery and Commons, which meant that we invited collectives, individual artists, and other small organizations, alternative art organizations as Pro Arts, to sort of unite under the auspices of a space which is shared and resources which are shared, and then participatory governance, participatory budgeting, and decentralized hierarchy of more decentralized autonomous structure for everybody's sort of like equitable and fair contribution to the system, right? And of course, not only contribution, but actually what we get out of it at the end, right? So when COVID hit, I don't want to say we were almost prepared, but we were sort of in a position in which we actually could indeed see the very cracks that we were describing pre-COVID, and we were sort of professing and preaching to other institutions. We saw those cracks illuminated. And so I believe that this is what really and truly saved us in a way. We are still standing. ProArt is still a viable organization. Still, we are supporting, over the years, ProArt has supported more than 20,000 plus artists in the Bay Area and beyond. So we are still here. And I believe that, again, COVID gave us this moment of reflection to actually really actually examine what we have been trying to achieve for the past several years as the commons, and how we can actually fully now scale up and invest today into the system, because I believe with COVID, we actually aligned much more on this new sharing economies that we kept talking about prior to COVID. But I think that during this pandemic, and also the civil uprising that happened in May 2020, that was I think the catalyst for examining or re-examining what is the role of the organization, what is the role of the artist within this the complicated and very much oppressive much of the times institutional and art market network, right, and economy. So the struggles that we experienced pre-COVID, unfortunately, are very similar to the struggles we're experiencing during COVID. But I believe that we are slightly more prepared for those failures because we were not losing billions of dollars or millions of dollars. We are quite equipped in quickly uniting and sharing the resources which we either had or had built as a community together and hold each other through the process. And the other thing I wanted to say is that even pre-COVID, we had coined this term in a way that nobody in a way understood, which is called radical openness. And I believe in an organization that can very quickly and very like ProArts is very agile because it's an alternative art organization. It can ebb and flow, but I think during COVID we very quickly re-envisioned the organization as a safe space, as a space in which we can, during COVID, we had many programs and we worked with house communities and different sort of marginalized populations to create perhaps these new resources that we all need today in terms of the sharing economy and in terms of changing our relationship as artists to institutions, community, and funders. So I believe that COVID did give us a pause and a scare and a chaos, but I do think that ProArts had already been preparing for a moment of shifting, of major shift, for a moment of not compulsively going back to history, but building something new, and something new that is based on shared vision, on commonalities that go beyond the local, the global, the identity, the who we are as an artist in a community and in relations to each other. And so today we continue to examine this relational aesthetics that I do believe hold an institution whole and can that is how I believe we survive, by re-examining and rebonding in the correct way through those spaces and sites, and again, means that we create for ourselves and for others.
Praba, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I want to jump in here because when I originally started working with Natalia and ProArts, she was formulating and working with others on this vision of the commons. And originally I was doing a performance in the gallery, the traditional setup, but very soon got involved much more with the ideas around the commons, these ideas of expanding the concept of the nonprofit gallery far beyond what grant making and grantors and philanthropic foundations are willing to fund. And not willing to fund like operational costs. And so I really got really excited about these ideas of expanding this network and of expanding this commons of all these fellows that are involved with ProArts and all these different arts in a sharing economy in a very different way than the traditional nonprofit grant making relationship with the artist. And so, for instance, quickly we went from doing stuff at the gallery to I doing a project with ProArts co-produced, but off-site completely. It was never going to be on site. It was at a food bank where people who are absolutely devastated by the gentrification and the changes in the Bay Area are coming to get food. And we did a year-long project there, but with a lot of active public engagement for 3 entire months. So then we've done other things offsite. We were doing something at the Cesar Chavez Library in Fruitvale. We were doing multiple different sites that was a way of expanding and distributing, redistributing, decentralizing all of the things that Natalia had been working towards. Before COVID, we were already moving this forward. Multiple artists that are working within the Commons were moving this forward. And I was hoping to start a slow tech makerspace there off-site, not on site, and perhaps, and I can talk more about things that we did together during COVID, but this ideas of decentralizing, of spreading the network, of not focusing so much on a hierarchical relationship, and absolutely not focusing on what the traditional art grant providing philanthropic organizations have as a vision for nonprofit galleries.
No, absolutely. And I think the pandemic has just made it clear, right, that we are each other's strengths and that we need to actually work together and not against one another. And from when I met Natalia through Praba, really, and I've been hearing these conversations around the commons and really visioning something that is egalitarian, democratic, that allows, and that isn't based on product, but is really based on like participation and process. And one thing that has come up is the Teaching Institute that I've heard numerous times from both of you. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that and how the seeds for that were sown.
So in
Natalia, if
2000,
you want to start, and then probably you can.
yes, I was going to say, because Prabha is actually so, I would love for her to tell us more, but I wanted to just say that the Teaching Institute, so in 2020, and this is again during COVID, as Prabha mentioned, we began really experimenting with also projects, right? So the project that Prabha and both you, Anuj, have been involved at ProArts was, in my opinion, sort of like, well, let's just do this project. Let's just do it. You know, let's just experiment also with content and with creating intellectual property, right? And all of this kind of is connected to, in 2020, we had this, I worked with Occupy IP, which is a collective currently in Spain, and Chris Burns, who became part of very much of the Teaching Institute. He's one of the founders and now very involved in the development of it. But together with Occupy IP and ProArts and all the, at that point we had common knowledge platform is a residency that I kind of structured and loosely organized under the auspices of those who are interested in art commoning can participate either through a project or through research or through some kind of contribution in print or in text or whatnot. So all of us began thinking, because Chris excited us. Chris is the catalyst for this idea, because he calls himself the experimental lawyer. He's not very, like, he's experimental, still very much a lawyer in intellectual property, copyright and patent law. And so we came up with this idea. Of course, Occupy IP has been working on this idea, so I don't want that to be in a light tone. They have been working on abolishing intellectual property and occupying intellectual property for quite a while now, and they have their own sort of like different field that they're examining with that. However, with us, we basically copyrighted a script, which is the mission of ProArts, which is now performing ProArts Commons. And that is now a transmedia script and a copyrighted license by US Congress. And those who call themselves Dadaist Americanos, or those who would like to contribute content via this, or under the auspices of under the copyrighted protection of the license, can do so. Should they want to, then they are Dadaist Americanos, which is a pseudonym. So this kind of work, as you can see, stems from or stems from a long history of Dadaist work and situationist work. And we but all of it is very, very real and important right now, and it's connected with the Teaching Institute, because we began really delving into and focusing in, again, ProArts has been occupying space, physical space, since '74. But how do we occupy intellectual space? Or how do we occupy virtual space with content? Or how do we get paid for intellectual labor, and how do we sustain or actually get even more agency by copywriting our work. But here's the catch, and here's the experimental thing, is that when you have the intention to copyright your work with a specific political intention, then you write a morals clause, which is injected into this very specific copyright license. And that morals clause, it can be very personal, or it could be a collective sort of intention manifesting of how you would like that work or that content to enter the system, and how other people can use it. And it's of course, you know, it's not a new, the open source licensing and so forth and so on. But what's new is that we began asking artists and cultural and workers and art laborers to use this funky copyright for the purpose of further gaining agency in the negotiation in the markets and with institutions and with funders and with public. But also, as an institutions, we began thinking the institution of art is performing, we are performing, and much like the church, we are performing this, we're commoning, we are performing the commons, we are art commoning the field, the economy, this new emerging systems. So with that, we also didn't want it to be stodgy, and what I just said is kind of like heady and I don't know, and so we began this fund called Performing Arts Funds, which is basically a commissioning funds for artists who are interested in creating at the intersect of art and law, and examining art, law, and economic relationships within the system of the intellectual property, which is of course, a very oppressive system, and we all know about that. And again, but it's connected with the idea of continuing to decentralize, keep sharing, keep decentralizing, keep breaking the boundaries that separate us, in the making of, in a way, like community empowerment through individual empowerment. So we kind of like refocused on working with artists, on performing the commons, so commoning through performance. And so, and then, because we've been doing this work now for maybe 2 years, on and off in different ways, hustling artists, like asking people to do that, try that, but we never really had, in a way, like a capsule to, everybody kept saying, okay, explain to me, do something, do a workshop online. I don't know, what does this all mean? Like how? And again, we as artists and cultural laborers and an institution even wanted to take a different approach, wanted to not concentrate on this system, which again very quickly becomes about power and about who is going to be part of this, how we're going to manage this, who is going to execute this. But we wanted to again say, well, you know, let us launch a teaching institute for art and law. And we called it a teaching because we wanted to kind of like also play with the idea, and not play, and very real in a way, have open knowledge platform, right? Artistic knowledge platform that we share, right? So the Teaching Institute will be teaching the teachings of artists, and will the Teaching Institute notes and sort of like, you know, I guess portals are those that would be created by those artists and their performances that in relation to this experimental copyright license, and in relation to their work at the intersection of art and law, and always questioning, and then breaking perhaps, or transgressing the boundaries that keep us apart, I suppose. Again, now we're with the Teaching Institute, we are trying to figure out, and I want to hear more about that from Praba, but we're in the beginning stages of figuring out how to actually build a decentralized autonomous organization that actually works, and also subverts, and also is located, the center and the focus is located within the art economy and the artists and the cultural workers, and not, and of course, education and artistic knowledge, but not actually become a teaching institute. So you see, we're still continuing to experiment, and this is the fun, I believe, about all the projects that we've worked even together, with two of you, that fun is number one in our work, because without fun, the work it's the relational aesthetics are lost. So, Prabha, what do you think about the Teaching Institute?
Well, I love that description. I mean, I think you covered most of the ground of what it emerges from, how it's related to the intellectual property processes that we're doing at the Commons, at ProArts Commons. And I think that what I would add to it is the relational part is really important as we're expanding this ProArts Commons. And a huge part of that expansion is really working strategically and carefully to really, as a part of decentralizing an institution, it's to really, reach out not only to your own community and communities beyond that, and really build very solid relationships so that the artists that are part of the Commons, and as that expands and changes, can, really work across all these different like networks, not just the network in Oakland, let's say. So for instance, I took the Tecnotamaladas during COVID to Peru to work with two very fascinating and amazing techno artists in Lima, Lorena Lopeña and Cecilia Vilca. So as part of the Commons, then we have these technology artists in Peru who would be part of the Teaching Institute. We would have a relationship with their institution, El Galpón in Lima. And we are gonna co-produce or make things together or as part of the Commons, because a lot of it's about relationships, solidifying relationships, building out our networks, being really attentive to the issues that have come up in the last 5 years as part of the social movements that Natalia mentioned. A lot about art organizations came up as part of all the different, political and revolutionary work of around the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as around the I Don't Know More movement, around the Dakota Pipeline, No DAPL movements. All these movements also turned to the arts institutions and brought up some of the problems and issues of hierarchical centralized leadership. So we're tending to all these in the first phase. Phase one is really attending to the relationships and to the network and building out the network in phase one. And then in phase two, really activating the teaching part while subverting at all times even the concept of a teaching institute.
I really love this focus on actually imparting to the community, right, the skills to make their own work, right? So that it's not art as something you go to consume, but art as an everyday practice that is part of all of our lives. And for me and for our viewers, really, Third Eye viewers, there is a lot of resonance I find between ProArts, which is a community-based. It was rooted in community when it began, and that's what Third Eye was too. It began as a community organization showcasing media from the South Asian American community, right? And it was a way really to do the same thing, make a space within the larger media ecology for ways of doing and also for stories that were not heard, right? So it was always both. And so I think that is essential for a community organization and for an arts organization to do really is not only provide events, and I've gone to so many events, amazing events at ProArts, music festivals, art shows, film screenings, the whole gamut. But what I really love about this new direction that you're moving into, that ProArts is moving into, is that it's really leading, it's setting up a whole new way or a new vision that is much more inclusive than just consuming, right? And how do we become more aware? Once we start to learn about the processes, then we become so much more aware of what is entangled in the artworks themselves, right? So thank you for this new vision that you're providing to us. Just a question though, I know ProArts, Natalia, you've mentioned before that ProArts has been rooted in downtown Oakland for, I don't know, how long has that been, that space that you were at?
So ProArts has been jumping around quite a bit in the past, but at the Oscar Grant Place, we've been, I believe, 15 years or so, so quite a long time. And so to answer your question, we we've just left. We've just several weeks ago we passed on the keys back to our landlords, the city of Oakland, and we basically cannot hold the space anymore. And this is the real truth of us, of us working for the commons, about the commons, in the commons, through the commons, and then realizing that yet, if only we had municipal or city, municipal city, but some form of true support by the city of Oakland or by the municipality of downtown or whatever it is, by a cultural commissioner or whatever we imagine this assembly to be, I believe that we could have still hold the space. But under the current circumstances of not having any support, minus us, the community and ProArts as the commons, which is wonderful, but we just couldn't take care of our operational needs, pay our rents. However, it is not a set sort of like living. We're beyond the fact that yes, we have services. There's so many artists and people that are still sort of like coming through and emailing me and saying, gosh, who is going to do this now? Where are we going to perform? Where are we going to have these magical moments? And yeah, I wish we can still be there, but under the circumstances of literally being strapped for rents and operational expenses, ProArts realized, as I said quite a bit ago, is that the only way to kind of like re-emerge and reinstate actually itself is, strangely enough, retrograding back to that decentralized way of working, becoming an umbrella for other projects and other innovative, very importantly, innovative projects to find permanence in these worlds. So ProArts today has a new office on Latin Square, still downtown, on Broadway. We're still kind of like settling in, so we will have a presence still downtown Oakland, but we are really investing now. We are very lucky to have received some major support recently. And so we are in terms of believing in this and finding permanence for this, the Teaching Institute project and the international residency and all of that. So what we'll do in the future is that we'll invest all our dollars, basically all of our, I say all of the public dollars, into people, not spaces, because the people make the spaces and the people are living the barrier because they cannot sustain their existence here. So we are fully aware that with us leaving our space, a lot of artists won't be able to be supported through space, but we believe that we can support artists today way more through actually paying artists directly, so they can pay their rent and eat and go travel. Again, we're also considering mobility grants. We're really excited about the international sort of like scaled up model of connecting with these kind of formations and artists and new emerging economies outside of like just way beyond our imaginations. We might even go to Mars. I'm not sure. We might even go to the moon with this project. So we're dreaming big, but we're truly investing in the labor and not the labor and the strategically supported site of productions, which will be decentralized. So we're still investing in the community, but no longer in one specific space, rather in a way more decentralized fashion and way, thus supporting more people and projects. Yeah.
I know that Pro Arts occupied a special place for downtown Oakland, right? Because there's not really that many spaces in downtown Oakland that offer something like this to the community. And I know you were trying really hard to make it a hub, to make it kind of a cultural space for people and for communities who live downtown, who work downtown, who found themselves in that space, right? And so I love that you're thinking of a place-based work as also including the moon. But how does place figure into Pro Arts now?
Natalia, your
Oh,
mic is off.
you're muted.
Sorry. Okay. Maybe we
And
can
maybe this is a
discuss that
redundant question.
in a collaboration actually with both of you, because I would like to ask you, how did you experience the space as one of the artists who have been creating on site, but also off sites? And so with both of you, I have worked both at ProArts, but then also now we're developing much different and much bigger projects, but we still continue to create together. So how do you feel about not having a space yet having the umbrella of ProArts of still working together?
I mean, I really want to give another example, because working together, co-producing with ProArts, with the Tecnotamaladas, and, definitely getting some funding during COVID from the Headlands Community Rapid Response Fund, and some of the funds that were provided to help artists with COVID, cancellations, which were extensive for so many of us. But with ProArts, we, working with the primary collaborators of Las Tecnotamaladas, Charlotte Sáenz and Ben Johnson, Charlotte said, let's grow corn and give corn away to the community members who live in disabled housing that Ben lives in and talks about a lot. And so Ben had shared that it's very hard on the fixed income of disability to buy fresh, organic, beautiful food. And so we decided, let's do that. Let's grow corn and give it away. Obviously, we weren't going to do that in downtown Oakland. So we were able to do that at a community garden completely off-site. The community gardener, Vicky Jo Sowell, was very excited to work with a gallery and with the project on this. And we were able to work for months, because from seed to harvest is quite a long process. Many artists came through and were part of COVID safe planting, tending, and then harvesting, including you, Anuj, and Charlotte and Targol and others. And then we were able to take that and give it to residents in this housing, but then also share these methodologies. So we did a webinar with Charlotte and Ben through ProArts that was in Oaxaca, Mexico, and in Oakland. Charlotte was in Oaxaca at that moment, where she does all this work on the milpa, and on the milpa as a methodology and a technology of, radical change, and that is the future that comes from a past, but it's really the future. And so in that webinar—
Praba, can I quickly interrupt? Just for those who don't know what a milpa is, because in our audience there might be folks, do you mind just explaining so that before we get too far, we have a
yeah,
reference?
and yeah, she was sharing in that webinar what a milpa is. And a milpa is an ancient way of growing food where you tend to the soil in a very careful way. It's not a monocropping at all. It's a way of, first you have to feed the soil and build the soil up a certain way. Then you put specific plants in there, the three sisters, to be able to have parts feeding the soil, some of the nutrients that are coming out of the soil. After your harvest, you do leave the milpa fallow. You do not plant again immediately, so that the soil can regenerate. And you perhaps plant something that's soil food on it, but not something that takes out from the milpa. So there are milpas in Mesoamerica that are 1,500 years old and have been producing for that long, areas of land, unlike the monocropping that's done obviously by agribusiness, where you just erode and destroy the soil. And we're looking at a lot of soil issues around the world. It's a very complicated subject, soil, as well as simple subject, soil, but soil needs to be cared for and cared about. And the milpa does that. So she was sharing that in the webinar, and also Ben was sharing how the similarities and differences between the response to the pandemic of his generation that most affected Ben, which was the AIDS pandemic, with the COVID pandemic. And all three of us were very affected by the AIDS pandemic, Charlotte, Ben, and I. And so we were also talking about how community comes together and what initiatives they introduced to, because like you said a minute ago, we really just have each other. And so what did we do then, and what are we doing under COVID to help each other? So that was a complete experience. It's just one of the many things we did offsite through, but as part of ProArts. So we don't need a building. We're growing stuff outdoors. We don't need to do a webinar at a building either. We don't need a space. We are the space. The space is wherever we artists are. So we can create a space, let's say in an agricultural vegetable garden, that's a community garden, that's now an art space. This is the gallery, this community garden now. And I think that also Ben, with all the corn, going back to the housing, Providence house that he lives in, and sharing it. Now that is the space of the gallery. That is ProArts Commons, is that it's in that corn, it's giving, it's sharing freely. It's like the space travels with the artist and with the relationships. That's where the space is.
Beautiful. I mean, it's just the here is always connected to the there, right? We can't really separate these things out. There's going to be impacts. What happens here is going to have an impact somewhere else in the world. And I think this way of working really drives home that point, is that we are all in the end interconnected and hold accountability, right, for one another. And so, I mean, we already started talking about the Techno Tamaladas as kind of a model for a new kind of project that ProArts is envisioning, is pursuing. Can you talk more about the Techno Tamaladas project?
Yeah, I would love to. I really wanted to just share for a minute, if I could. Do you mind if I share screen?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I'll continue talking, but I will share this screen where, you know, the Techno Tamaladas is a project that really, I'm just showing you the website. It's a project that we are really trying to look at thousands of years. We're doing future technology. That's what we're doing, future technology. And so we draw on thousands of years of practice and knowledge, cultivating corn, cultivating maize, not commodity corn, but maize across the Americas to sustain life. So we draw really from the indigenous technology of nixtamalización as a technology of life in order to reimagine technological futurity. And it's the future technology that we're looking at. We're not in some way romanticizing or trying to go back to anything at all. It's that when you look at nixtamalization, and how it works with the milpa, with maize, and with community, and it's done through collective knowledge, collective gatherings, and it leads to collective resurgence. These are the technologies of life that we're interested in further developing for future tech. And so here I can share that we've done a lot of different projects starting in 2019, where we shared over 1,500 tamales freely in these in-person gatherings at a food bank in order to discuss nixtamalization, technologies of life, you know, what it is that we envisioned in the future. And people came and made tamales because it's a tamalada. People make tamales together. They're very, you make 500 at a time. Why bother making 5? You make a lot. And so they learn, and, you know, it was very involved. Pro Arts was very involved. And then even the city of Emeryville, where we held it at a food bank there, the mayor came and made tamales, as did various city council members. And while they're making tamales to share, they're listening to people talk about these questions of life, of resurgence, of what are the things that we see that as problems that we can address and change, and what can we introduce in order to support and sustain life outside of the capitalist like the kind of death drive of capitalism right now. And so it's a very long-term project. It's local, it's regional, it's international, it's intergalactic. Also, that has to do
Tamales
with,
for everywhere.
yes. And, you know, of course, we were as co-producing it with Pro Arts, we had all kinds of events that we were doing locally in Oakland and Emeryville and Berkeley, and then also in New York and the Grafters Exchange. There was a performance in Thompson Square Park, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So taking Pro Arts, and again, the space would have been in Tompkins Square Park in New York. That would have been Pro Arts Commons. And the Grafters Exchange in Hamilton, and wherever we go. But obviously all that changed because of COVID. And so we were able to do the community milpa, cultivate the corn, harvest the corn, do these webinars, do online tours. And then we were able to do a residency in San Jose at MACLA, where working with the Teen Tech Center there, doing workshops on technologies of life, pláticas en Parque de los Pobladores, so outdoor dialogues, outdoor events. We created all these conceptual tamales that we then had in galleries in different settings, including Taranay Hamami's Green Parcels Project and Minnesota Street Projects. And primarily we focused on working with Lorena Lopeña and Cecilia Vilca in Lima, Peru, and hopefully we're going to be doing simultaneous events in Lima and with Pro Arts, you know, popping up somewhere, creating a space to do a Pro Arts event, maybe even Oscar Grant Plaza at some point. And so hopefully we'll be able to do that next year. And we, rather than pivoting, what we did is expand. We didn't pivot because of COVID. I hear that a lot, like, how did you pivot? And it's like, no, if you're working through the commons and you're working to decentralize and you're working to get rid of this idea that a nonprofit gallery is going to get funded to pay rent, pay staff, pay liability insurance, pay electric bills, they're not going to get funded to do that. And so, as we're working through no longer depending on that model, this project fit right in. Like, this project does not depend on that model, and it's not pivoting. It's continually expanding from what the participants bring to the table. So if the participants tell us that they can't come and they can't do this and they can't do that, then we respond to that. And one of the things that participants have told us is, we don't understand what you mean by this parallel world. So with Lorena and Cecilia in Lima, we started really creating Nixta Valley. Nixta Valley, the valley founded by Nixtamalización, is that space. It is a space that exists alongside Silicon Valley. We're not Silicon Valley. We have some connections to it, but we are a parallel world of technologies of life, of resurgence, of joy, of celebration, of community, collaboration, of sharing, of conviviality, of generosity. That is what Nixta Valley is. And we're elaborating that together with Cecilia and Lorena over this year. And so it's a project that keeps adapting, changing, moving. It's not tied to any specific space. And we are able to grow like a maize plant. So the root is, I started this process in 2018 out of another performance. So then it went this way, and Charlotte and Ben and Pro Arts, this is there. So that's that. And then it keeps growing. Now we have Cecilia and Lorena, and we have Nixta Valley. So it will keep growing in this way, and it will keep expanding, and it really will play in this commons of pro arts and work together on these types of expansions, and specifically of how do you take a space, how do artists in a commons create space wherever they are?
Yeah. What I really love about this project, and there's so much to love about this project, is as a media artist, to me, the project really kind of implodes how we understand what media is, or what technology is, media technology. And we've been given this story that media and technology are always high tech, right? But what you do is flip that on its head and say, no, actually, like, the technologies of life are like the oldest technologies. And if we are to know those technologies, then we have to make relations with folks in Peru who actually are the holders of this knowledge as well, right? Like, we can't just appropriate it and say it's ours.
And
And
in
so,
Oaxaca, like Charlotte, in Oaxaca also,
exactly.
and Chiapas.
For our audiences, they might be interested in hearing about the Tamale Wars. Do you mind mentioning that a little bit, because it has a little South Asian tinge to it?
Yes, there's an amazing journalist, Kathleen Schultz, who worked on really understanding the histories of tamales in the United States. And she really started with this immigrant in the 1800s from what is presently called Afghanistan. At that time, it was not called Afghanistan, that region. But the area that this immigrant was from, he, at that time in the late 1800s, the tamale trade in the Western United States was completely run by immigrants from that region, from Afghanistan. And in the American West, like in Wisconsin and in Montana, all these regions, tamale stands and tamale restaurants were owned and operated um, by these Muslim vendors from that region. And it became like a real competitive space about, the reason that it becomes such a great tool for immigrant survival is to make a tamal and sell a tamal. You need a big pot to steam them. You need corn husks that you can get or grow. You need masa and you need contents. So you don't need a huge operation, a huge sophisticated system. You need the pot and these ingredients. So they were able to just quickly set this up and it became a competitive space. And then these tamale wars started and erupted between who had the better tamales and who had the right to sell them and what was going on over here and who was taking out over there. And the family, the Khan, the Khan family was in so many different parts of the American West at that point, in 1890, 1895, 1900, 1905. And they were really selling quite a bit. And this woman that traces, this journalist that really traces this journey, shows how Tamale Louie was able to not only open this place, sell the tamales, and provide for his own family. He was able to build, like all of these institutions in the town he was in, and really provide for so many others. And there was no actual strife at that time in the late 1800s, early 1900s, religious strife. And so actually his descendants, who have born and raised in the United States, are the ones dealing with natalist, United States natalist visions of the American West, where they're saying you don't belong here. And his descendants have said, we've been here longer than you. Montana, you didn't get here as early as we did. So no. And it's a fascinating kind of, the tamale trails really include one of the things about this hemisphere, Abya Yala, the Americas. The truth of this hemisphere is you have this indigenous people, north to south, all over, that were developing these amazing cultures with very advanced technologies. And then you have the conquest. But before the conquest, there was migration coming through Polynesia and through different places. There's definitely all kinds of migration that was happening and trade that was peaceful at that time. Then you have the conquest, and then there's waves and waves and waves of migration that have happened here. So that is how there's a very large population of Japanese descendants in Peru. Why is there a large population of Chinese descendants in Cuba? Why is there a large population of Lebanese descendants in Colombia? I could go on and on. So I love the tamale wars and the tamale trade stories to include that this hemisphere is not just the story of the transatlantic slave trade and the colonization process from Europe. There's also, so it's not just the Afro-descendant, the indigenous, and the mestizaje. There's also all of these waves and waves of migration that have happened here, and all of the contributions that different migrant groups have made to this hemisphere.
And if I'm not mistaken, the Joffrey Ballet was actually bankrolled by the tamales that the Khan family sold, right?
Yes, it was. And yes, it was. And the name was changed. Uh, the They changed the name, Joffrey, to kind of Americanize it. But yes, yes, it was. And we have a
So
link to
little,
that article that really
yeah.
explores all that on the Tecnotamaladas website, because it's a really,
Do you want to give us the URL for the website?
yes, because yes, it's tecnotamaladas.com. And we really
Simple as that.
celebrate this story, and we don't want the stories not to be included in the history of tamales. It's really important to follow these trails of tamales and learn, be open to learning what really happened with tamales here. This, I mean, the Porfiriato in Mexico, the dictatorship tried to ban, outlaw tamales because they're too important as a cultural product, and so they have to be feared. Tamales,
Wow.
they're to be feared. So there's a lot in the tamale trails, and a lot of it we have on the website or links to, especially the hot tamales made by African Americans in the Mississippi Delta. I could go on and on, but there's so many different tamale trails that are so fascinating.
And we will discover the intergalactic tamales sometime in the near future as well.
Yes,
Or we
yes,
should meet them. They've already exist, I'm sure.
yes, of course.
So thank you for sharing, for both of you, for sharing your labors of love over the last decades of your lives. And really, you can tell the Techno Tamaladas and Pro Arts both have this expansive vision, right? That connects different parts of our lives, different parts of our world to one another, and gives really the community the tools not only to engage with art, but actually to understand it better and actually make it as well, so that we can actually communicate and learn the language of art better, and be better, more informed consumers as well. I had the opportunity of working through the Haifa Collective, which is this collective out of Davis, Davis, California. And we work with fungus and fermentation. And we did this project called Mother Nurture, which was really thinking about the cycles of life and death. And it was working once again with the material and with process. And we had people grow their own kombucha leather. And then they brought it into the gallery space in order to create a social sculpture. And then we went and did a lichen walk one day to think with queer lichen. Lichen is models for queer life. And then in the end, we built a shroud, which is the image that you can see behind me. It was a shroud. This part of the shroud. It was kind of an open lab. The Pro Arts became an open lab over a period of 3 months, where we would come and dye wool with naturally foraged materials such as mushrooms or lichen. One of our participants had actually grown silk by hand in her own home for over 3 years, and she brought that silk to make the sculpture. So we were working with multiple different materials, giving the community workshops in how to actually grow this themselves, how to create these materials themselves. And then we came together over a period of 3 months to both create works, engage in processes. And then in the end, we undertook a silent procession, which was really thinking about the scale of loss and suffering in the sixth extinction that we're undergoing right now. Just reminding us that this world that we share is not only with other humans and other cultures, but with non-humans as well, right? And how do we actually sit with the scale of that kind of loss? And so we undertook a silent procession to Lake Merritt, or Lagoon Merritt, as it really is. And so that was a really beautiful 3-month journey, where I got to come to Pro Arts and participate with the community in such a beautiful way. And that led to the creation of a series of sleeves for Natalia's book, which she will tell you more about.
I wanted to just say something before the book. Both of you, as you discussed your works, I just realized how privileged I am and how beautiful it was that actually you, both of you in particular, with your collectives and your imagination, actually use ProArts the way that I was trying to build ProArts to be used. In other words, I remember you said it was, I don't know, it's like 3 months. Wow. But pretty much when you did that project, when Haifa Collective came to ProArts, we are kind of on the way out already. So it was quite chaotic. And I pretty much said to you, here's the keys, here's your space, build it, love it, grow it, and own it. And I believe that this is the interesting part that we kind of like went back and forth a little bit about. It's really not about the space, but when you do get the space, what you do with it. I think this is the continuous conversation that we have to continue having, because again, we fail often to have this reciprocal connection that is needed to support a community space, you know, to own that space for the exhibition. And if you, again, it sounds wonderful to say, go with it, just do whatever you want to. And I've said that to so many artists, and that is the block. As soon as you can do whatever you want to, you just, wait, I mean, I am responsible. You're not going to come and check on me. You're not going to slap me if I'm wrong. I think this is the beautiful thing that we kept experimenting with ProArts for years now, is how do you actually embody and practice this open, radical openness? And the only way to do that is to have artists like yourselves and your collectives and your connections, because you need to have the agency and you need to own your work in order to engage and participate in a real conversation with the audience and the community and everybody else. And so
And I've never felt more supported in the
thank you.
work.
Because I think that also shifts the dynamic. And so we are no longer, I'm not really supporting you, but I'm co-conspiring with you. I'm part of the project. And you know, those who know me, not many people in your program would do, but I'm very anxious and excited to be part of the collaboration team. And to that end, and in a way to introduce the book, is myself, since I began really talking about the commons, I began actually thinking also about my role as the director of arts, or as a curator, or somebody who has the keys to the castle. How does one decentralize I was for a while kept saying, how do I fire myself, or how do I make myself redundant, right? And I realized actually that's not it. It's like, how do you actually support artists without being the curator or the professional or the boss, or how do you actually find commonality on idea? And to do so, I kind of like moved more so in my executive director position, but as a actually performing that position, or actually being an artist myself. And it's interesting, I just did a podcast with a friend of mine, Bosch, who I haven't seen for a while, and we talked about the fact that COVID gave us also that breathing time to go back, you know, or to go into ourselves, and kind of something shifted. I feel like a lot of people that I talked to today have really taken the time to focus on their own self, on their craft. And yes, how do we connect with everybody else? But if you're not, I guess, if you don't practice self-healing, you cannot really heal others through anything. And not that we're healing people, but we are engaging in a very healing way through the arts, right? To me, art is really about expression and healing and conversation and communication of ideas, as well as everything else, political and so forth and so on. So I am also, I am now performing ProArts Commons, occupying intellectual property. I have had the pleasure incredible pleasure to actually perform my book with Praba already at ATA Gallery and other cinema in San Francisco. And what that really means is that I collaborated on a book project with Mark Herbst, who is a author and an artist who lives in Germany. And over the period of COVID for a year, we went back and forth as in exquisite corpse, discussing in a way through image and words, our anger and love and our emotions that we felt during commons as leaders, as friends, as lovers, as human beings, and as those who actually hold the commons together at the end, right? So the book is called The Commons of Friends and Lovers, and I have been
Could you hold that up to the camera, Natalia, so we can just
I've been
see
performing it. This is my
the
reading
image?
copy, so it's very, very
Right.
dirty and sort of like travels because I'm performing it big time this way. But I find that again related to pro arts and to what I do, and I again heard that from both you and Praba through this conversation. It's almost like pro arts is like that's exactly the idea of performing pro arts commons is the ethos that you take on, is the commoning idea, is the idea of abundance and sharing and love and passion for the good, right? So it's about the libidinal economies of us building something, either that be a project or simple events. We always operate under the auspices of relational aesthetics. We never operate because we have $5,000 or because somebody said that we have to do it, right? So the book in a way became really interestingly and straightly enough as we're printing the book and processing the book in a way, I often feel like I actually, though the book is not a book, it's not it's poetry, it's fun, it's sort of like an essay format, like a zine, but it actually says a lot about, I suppose, but also my inability to often hold the commas or do the commas and just the failure and successes of us. So so the book I'm continuing to perform because I have now become the traveling salesman of these ideas, which are very, as I said, very, very real and very, it's about collectivism, it's about the new economy we're building. And and as a way of performing the book, in each location, site, or whenever I want to, basically spontaneously, I have the authority to say, hey, Anuj, do you want to like work with me on this book? You want to come into this project? The idea is to, Praba, can you perform this book with me at ATA? So again, the idea is to actually collaborate on, continue to collaborate on already collaborative, collective, copywritten project produce, right? How do we continue to create shared intellectual property and then redistribute those proceeds equitably to now a potentially very big population, right? So in this way, it's kind of like selling the idea of working within collective ownership, basically, and the redistribution and distribution of collectively of resources, especially to artists, to writers, and so forth and so on. And so I had that moment, and I said, Anuj, because we already have been working, you already had the Mother Nurture up at the gallery, and I thought that because again the book has several sort of topics, I suppose, that one can say or discuss. One of them is pain and transformation through pain, or transforming love and anger. I'm sorry, transforming pain into love and anger. Not the opposite. Not the opposite. Though it may happen. What I was going to say is that it seemed to me very natural that we played together with Hive Collective, because your project at ProArts was so much about transformation and growth through experiencing and releasing pain and processing pain. And we don't have the time often to process pain and love, actually, in the correct way. So I immediately asked if you guys would consider collaborating with me on a what turned out to be an amazing project that maybe you can tell a little bit more about how you guys did those sleeves. But we actually did 10 editions sleeves for this book, which is copywritten under Performing Products Commons. So you see now the Hive Collective and Anuj and everybody else is part of this, collaborative intellectual property, and thus we bring the value up. So the idea is that the 10 copies that you guys did with the kombucha leather that are very special and very unique would be then positioned, very strategically positioned and sold in museum, especially stores. So again, like continue to subvert, but then in a very, very real way, work through occupying space. And so I think the interesting part is that now that ProArts has no space, it's actually so interesting to me, because now we are really pushing for occupying space. Now we are really like out there, like, no, we have to, because you see this one, we don't have anymore, So in a way, like, how do you actually reclaim space, occupy space in this new, and how do we actually collaborate on intellectual property when often there's no money in it, and or how do we find the commonalities again with our collaboration was sort of natural and organic, but often it's not. And how do we then find those commonalities to continue to expand these modes of production? So anyway, but tell us more, tell the audience more about the beautiful sleeves, because they're amazing.
Well, I'll just keep it short in the interest of time, because I also want to hear you read from your book. So the sleeves are made of kombucha leather, and they were sewn using wool that we had dyed using lichen that we had foraged in the hills around in the Bay Area. And what other natural materials did we use? And it also included the silk that Caro had grown by hand for 3 years. And then we put that all together, and each one of us, as part of the collective, put our own designs on each one of those sleeves. So each one is uniquely made for Natalia's book. And I think in the end, it all comes together, right? Like the ProArts, Techno Tamaladas, the Haifa Collective, we're all thinking not just about making a living, but how to make a life together. And so much of art and so much of the market is really about making a living, right? It's all about the money. And we're realizing in this conversation, I'm realizing too, that we have so much richness and so much wealth just from our community connections and from the wealth of our ideas. And I think for me, the strongest value that I find in all of this is not this ownership, not this individual ownership, but this collective ownership, right? That you're pushing towards, and how can we actually move towards that in all of the work that we do, in all of the media work, the artwork, but in all parts of our lives. So thank you for sharing, both of you, Praba and Natalia, for sharing your work. And we'll leave our audiences with a reading from Natalia's book, The Commons of Friends and Lovers.
Thank you so very much. And I hope that the part that I unintentionally chose some time ago today is actually working out really well for closing. So do enjoy. And I'll put my glasses on too, sorry, as I'm struggling. I value love as currency so much greater than any coin or NFT. I value human eyes, touch, heartbeat, helping hands, affection. The oppressive system always exposes the cracks in our collective humanity, and our complicit role we play as empaths is amplified as we try to feel through and also counterintuitively heal those breaks. Narcissists do not get enough credit for their role in destroying the commons, a system built on human error, an error in the predictive formula for optimism, and most precisely, how the value of reciprocity is created and propagated to only serve the narcissist in all of us in the end. Duality in people's character is overrated. Always the demon and the angel, always the empath and the narcissist, always the same. Are we not more nuanced than that? Alas, we art workers all know about the transgressions of the unregulated art market, yet, despite this knowledge, we try to save it from certain death, ignoring our collective debts. Why do we keep trying? Why do we follow false prophets till the end? Are we afraid to look straight into the sun? Are we more comfortable releasing our gaze only when the moon descends? Yes. Should I stop here? And then you have to buy the book and find out more, because then you find out how to transmute pain into love.
Something we all need to learn, right? And you can find the book on the ProArts website.
On the ProArts website, and also there very soon, you will be able to see the 10 very exquisite and very unique kombucha leather sleeves for the book.
We're not going to show you an image. You'll have to go to the website to take a look at those. And the website is proartscommons.org.